Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. This week's episode and all of MacStories this week is brought to you by Concepts. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vitici. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You know, we got past those dog days of summer. We had a whole thing about the dog days of summer not too long ago. We learned about what the Roman. I was going to say the Romans, but it was actually the Greeks who coined that term. So, you know, we're still in the dog days of summer. Is it still hot in Rome?
It's too hot. It's literally too hot. I'm basically a man. I'm basically a sweaty man
melting man.
Melting and trying to live his life in the, just very close to the AC in my room.
Oh.
I basically spent the past week locked up in my room in the dark because it makes me concentrate better with the AC on, writing my iOS 14 review.
I know what you mean about the dark. And you know what? I think we live very strange lives. And it's probably best not to reveal all those details.
Yeah, Sylvia came into the room one day. She was like, do you know we can turn on the lights? Do you know that we have lights? I'm like, please turn it off because I need to concentrate. She's like, you're going to go blind. It's like, can you even see the screen? I'm like, please turn it off. I need my focus. Right now.
All right. Well, let's dive into what we did this week on the website. And on MacStories this week, I had a couple of different stories. The first one that I wanted to mention was about Mac Catalyst, because Mac Catalyst has really evolved in an interesting way from way back in 2018, where it was called Sneak Peek by Craig Federici, to this year, where not only do we have what was possible in 2019 with bringing iPad apps over to the Mac, but we got something called Optimized for Mac. And it's a whole different path for Mac Catalyst apps. And what's important about it is that instead of being scaled down 77% and using a lot of the iPad UI inside the Mac Catalyst app on the Mac, it actually substitutes in more of the native Mac App Kit UI elements. So, you know, things like buttons and sliders that are exactly like you would have them on the Mac, and things like checkboxes. There's a lot of new UI elements that are available if you go this route. The downside of doing that is that it's more work, because when you change these UI controls to the Mac versions, it changes, you know, the spacing and the scale and everything within the layout of an app. And so there's a lot of tweaking that has to happen for the design to look right on the Mac. But the end result gives you something that's a lot closer to what people would say is Mac-like, which is a term I try to stay away from, but it follows what I guess you would call the Mac conventions, the sort of things you'd see in apps that comply with Apple's human interface guidelines. So Catalyst has come a long way, I think, between the Optimized for Mac and the fact that Apple has built Messages and Maps, which are two flagship apps on the Mac, out using Mac Catalyst, that they've shown kind of the commitment a lot of developers were hoping that they would. And I'm very optimistic about where Mac Catalyst is going. We saw some good apps in 2019, but we also saw some not so great apps. I think that's going to continue because that's the way it is on every app store. On the other hand, I think there's an opportunity now for developers to make apps that fit in much better on the Mac, and it'll be a nice transition to a day when Swift UI, for instance, is a little more robust and can be at the core of a full-blown Mac app, which it's really not there yet.
Yeah, I'm very excited about seeing what developers can now do with Catalyst on the Mac. I remember being very, very into the idea of being able to have some of my favorite iPad apps on the Mac with Catalyst last year, and that only happened to an extent. And I feel like now Apple has rectified a bunch of stuff, especially with the new Optimized for Mac version of Catalyst. And I really hope that now I can see this influx of iPad apps and utilities coming to the Mac, because I use the Mac a couple of times a week just to record podcasts, like right now, for example. And it's quite sad that that some of the best apps from iOS and especially from iPad are just not here. So hopefully this revised an updated version of Catalyst will be, hopefully it'll work better than last year, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that that's what we're going to see. I mean, a lot of people sat out the first version of Catalyst, and I can't really blame them. But I think there's an opportunity here now, and I hope to see more of those apps coming over because, apps like GoodNotes and Lookup, for instance, they did a terrific job with that first iteration. And I think those apps are only going to get better, and there'll be more apps in kind of that class of good Mac Catalyst apps that people will be able to use on their Mac. And I'm looking forward to them this fall. All right, Federico, the second review that I did this week was for Due, D-U-E. Due for Mac is all about timers and reminders. And what's unique about the app is that it can be kind of a nag app. What it does is it has an auto snooze feature so that what happens is when the time comes for you to do something, it gives you an alert. And if you don't do it, it will keep alerting you at whatever period of time you've defined, whether it's 5 or 10 minutes or whatever, and it'll just keep alerting you over and over until it's done. Now, you probably don't want to do that with everything in your life because it would be stressful and drive you crazy. But if you have some sort of task that you absolutely have to have done, say, at a particular time, it's a really good way to make sure you don't forget it. And so it got an update on the Mac this week. It had been updated on iOS about a year ago, I want to say. The design on the Mac is definitely different than iOS, and I think I like it better on the Mac. It uses a lot of bold typography, has some really nice themes, both light and dark, and you can do things like collapse sections because you can have reminders that are due today, tomorrow, and then in the future. I think there are four different total categories. And, you don't want to, if you have a lot of them, you can collapse those sections so you only see the ones that are coming up soon or however you want to do that. And I've been really happy with it. I mean, it all syncs over iCloud too. So you can have those same reminders show up on your phone or your iPad and also on your Apple Watch.
Yeah, it's very nice app. I don't use it myself, but I think the new version looks really, really nice with new design language. They did a very good job. It's been in development for a while, I think. So
it has been, yeah. I've had the beta for a while, yeah.
Yeah, nice to see it's finally out. Also on the website this week, we had a review from Ryan on the latest version, I believe it's version 2.4, of Fiery Feeds. So Fiery Feeds, one of the most popular RSS readers on iOS, iPadOS, and the Mac with Catalyst, I believe. This is one of the few apps I purchased with Catalyst last year. The new version on iOS and iPadOS has a bunch of really, really nice additions. So the first one, this is dear and close to my heart. It's something that I always bring up on AppStories.
Yes.
So you can now do saved searches in Fiery Feeds. I'm really happy about this. You can save a search. Even if you don't use Fiery Feeds with like iCloud Sync, but even if you use, like me, for example, Fitbin, you can now create saved searches directly on your iPhone or your iPad. And saved searches are possible because Fiery Feeds now indexes the full text contents of your articles. So I created, for example, a saved search called iOS 14 that now looks into all my Fitbin subscriptions and essentially puts together a list of headlines that match the iOS 14 keyword, either in the title or the body text. So that's very nice. Obviously, this is one of those desktop class features that unfortunately so very few apps implement on iOS and iPadOS. Fiery Feeds now has it, and it's very nicely done. Also, this is quite nerdy, but I want to mention it because I think it's cool. It's been in the beta version for a while, and now it's sort of it graduated to being the default setting for Fiery Feeds. So Fiery Feeds now has something called native rendering for article content. Native rendering meaning that the developer of Fiery Feeds figured out a way to render HTML using native UIKit elements. So instead of using, I don't know, something like an HTML image is using UI image. And instead of using regular HTML captions, is using UI label, for example. So the UIKit versions of HTML elements. And the reasoning behind this is twofold. One is obviously greater speed and performance, because you're using an iOS and iPadOS device. You can use UIKit, and if you can figure out how to properly convert between HTML and UIKit, the developer figured out a way to do so in a way that is efficient and fast. And so rendering even long articles should take less time than before. And the second reason, I think, it's accuracy, just because the way that this engine has been built, basically what I'm trying to say is that sometimes you use an RSS reader and something goes wrong in the rendering of the article extracted via HTML from RSS. You know what I'm talking about, like those weird elements and buttons, and broken links sometimes. And this shouldn't happen with native rendering in Fiery Feeds. So it's very cool, and I think it's the only RSS reader that does this on the platform. So I think it's a very cool idea. And lastly, there's pointer integration throughout the entire app. So if you use an iPad and have a Magic Keyboard or a trackpad or a mouse, you can now hover over elements in Fiery Feeds, and you can highlight them and click them. And the difference here is that Fiery is perhaps a little more aggressive than other apps, including Apple's own apps that you may have seen in iPadOS, in that it literally highlights every single element, which you either like or dislike. Like, I believe Ryan didn't exactly like this aspect. I kind of like it myself, I think. Like, for example, even if you hover with a pointer and you move through the list of headlines, like those even are highlighted, which does not necessarily happen, for example, in Mail or in Notes, when you're hovering with a pointer over your list of messages or your list of notes. This is a different approach. Maybe this should be a setting for people who dislike it, but I don't mind it, and I think it's very unique to Fiery Feeds. So obviously Fiery Feeds is very much on the power user side of the RSS spectrum. So if you're the type of person who really likes to fiddle around with a lot of settings, which are now searchable in the latest version of Fiery Feeds, and if you have an iPad, I would say go check this out. Fiery Feeds was one of the first apps to support a 3-column layout on iPad before it was an actual system thing in iPadOS 14. Fiery Feeds already has it, and I assume it'll be updated for the native Apple version of 3-column layout in the fall, but for now you can already use it. So really, really good RSS reader.
Yeah, that pointer interaction, I think, is something we're going to see more of, because one of the things announced at WWC was the focus engine coming to things like collection views. So it's fairly straightforward, I think, for developers now to highlight things as you're moving the pointer over them. I want to mention, too, just really briefly, you and I released an episode of AppStories at the beginning of the week, which was all about great app design. And we talked about a whole variety of things, but we covered things like pet peeves and apps we love and what we think is done really well and what's not done so well, both on iOS, the Mac, and the iPad. And it was a good discussion. I mean, you and I aren't designers, but we also know we've seen a lot of apps and we know what we like. And so I think it was kind of a good, I guess, user-centric version of design and what we find works for us. This week, too, was a big week for the club because, not only do we do MacStories Weekly every week, but we also have a monthly log, which is a separate newsletter that we send out towards the end of the month. I covered something that has been bugging me for a while, ever since I saw a tweet from John Gruber, who was looking for what I think he described as a great, simple outliner app that works across all of Apple's platforms. And you would think that exists, but it's kind of a lost art. There really aren't a lot of great outlining apps out there. And so I sat down and thought about what I really wanted to see in an outlining app and put that in the log. And then I went further in Weekly this week and talked about Outlinely, which is the closest thing I've found towards this type of outlining app I want, but it's got just a few things missing and a few flaws that kind of bother me, that I wish someone would dig into the modern APIs and build from the ground up a brand new outlining app. We also had in the log Ryan talking about his favorite beta features from across a bunch of the different betas that are out right now. He's a very bold person. He's got the iOS beta, iPadOS, watchOS, and tvOS all installed.
Hey, I'm the same. I'm also a bold person.
See,
I can be
all
bold.
right, you're bold. I don't have tvOS or watchOS installed.
That's because you're not bold.
I think it's just because I'm lazy and haven't bothered. There's nothing worse than installing watchOS, and it's hard enough to keep up with.
There's nothing worse than installing a tvOS beta.
Oh, is it really bad?
Oh, you know what you got to do. You at least I think it's still the case. Actually, I'm not bold enough, John. I don't have the tvOS beta. But I do have iOS, iPadOS, watchOS, and macOS. Okay. So it kind of compensates for that. tvOS, I believe it is still the case that you need to download the certificate file, upload it to Dropbox, find the Dropbox link, find the hidden text field in tvOS settings where you can install a certificate by pasting a URL and pasting that Dropbox URL. It's a wild thing to do. I can tell you that much. It's really not a fun, 15 minutes of your life if you're gonna do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I still have I have one of the original developer TV Apple TVs that has a USB-C connection to it, and so I think that was one of my first USB-C devices actually.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I don't want to unplug because I know that you can install a tvOS beta by plugging the Apple TV into your computer and using Xcode, but I can't do it because I placed my Apple TV behind my television like 2 years ago, I never reached out to it again because I would have to remove my TV, and it's like it's sitting high on a piece of furniture, and I don't really want to do it.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And then it's, as soon as you do that, you're going to screw something up and it'll be broken, and then everybody will be unhappy with Federico. I get how that works. All right, so why don't you tell everybody what you did on the club this week?
So for the log, I wrote about MindNode and specifically how I'm using MindNode to manage the mind map of my iOS and iPadOS 14 review. Now, you may say, well, this is nothing exciting because we know how you manage your mind map. You've written about this before. However, there's a twist in that I am now using a new feature of MindNode 7, which came out a few months ago. This feature is called Visual Tags, and I'm using Visual Tags to tag, because that's what it does, different sections of my review. And the really nice thing about Visual Tags is that they allow you to filter your map, so you only see the nodes, so the little sections of the map that have been tagged with a specific visual tag. So for example, I have a tag that is called tidbits, and I've been using this one to save these little features, these little details of iOS 14. I have another one that has the red color that says to confirm, and with this visual tag later I can go in and, like in beta 3, there are some features that are not working as expected. In a few weeks, I can go in the map and filter by the to confirm visual tag, and I can double check if they're working now in a later beta or not. I have another visual tag called aside, and with this visual tag, I can mark all the sections of my review that I want to include on the website as those little aside boxes that I use in my web layout. So just it's a very nice way to filter a mind map by topic, I guess you could call it that. And what's even nicer is that not only do the visual tags work in the map, but they also work, and this is on the topic of outliners, they also work in the built-in outliner that is in MindNode. Now, of course, the outliner in MindNode is not like a full real outliner. It's a view option for the mind map, but visual tags also work in there, which I think is really nice.
That is nice. And, I decided to go with an outlining format this year for planning out my Mac OS review, mainly because I just wanted to try something different. Nice. And MindNode is fantastic, but I have been using Outlinely. So, more on that in the future. So just closing things out on Weekly, Ryan also covered the Nighthawk Twitter client, which is our favorite this week in Weekly. It's a fantastic app that has really come a long way since the initial release. I don't even know how long ago now it's been. It's been at least 6-9 months, something like that. But yeah, it's a fantastic Twitter client, and he has a write-up all about some of the features that he loves about it the most. And I know you also wrote a little bit about watchOS automation, right, on using shortcuts.
Yeah, I wrote about using what you can do with the new watch actions and automations in shortcuts for iOS 14. So it's something a bit different than usual, mostly to show off what can be done with like changing modes and changing watch faces on the watch, running watchOS 7, of course, the beta, and shortcuts in iOS 14. So sort of the idea of how can you use shortcuts as like a utility to control your Apple Watch. I think it's really interesting. This is different from using shortcuts and the shortcuts app on the watch, but I'm referring to the idea of things like changing watch faces, for example, or setting silent mode, right? From your iPhone, automatically using shortcuts, which is one of the possibilities opened by Apple this year with automation and watch integration in shortcuts. So I wrote about that in Weekly, and I'm sure I will continue to write about more shortcut stuff in the summer for the club and eventually on the website, of course. But I think like the more research I do and the more I use shortcuts in iOS 14, I really do feel like automation is the feature in shortcuts this year. Last year, it was, of course, the new editor and the parameters and the new actions. And I think Apple instead, this time around, they really, I mean, except folders and multi-window and all that sort of app stuff.
Right.
But when it comes to like what can you actually do with shortcuts, I feel like in 2020, the focus is very much on automation. And so that's what I'm trying to do more research about and use all that kind of stuff in shortcuts.
Yeah, ultimately, what's going to get me on the watchOS beta is, in fact, shortcuts, because that's something that I really want to try. All right, everybody, I want to thank our sponsor for today's episode, and that's Concepts. And Concepts is not only sponsoring this episode of Unwind, but all of MacStories this week, and especially our summer preview series. You know, we've been doing a bunch of articles on the site, like the Mac Catalyst app that I talked about earlier, as well as an upcoming episode of AppStories with Guy Rambo. So they've really stepped up and supported this entire series for us. So we're very thankful for that. Concepts is an infinite canvas app that if you haven't tried it, you really should, because it's something that I use a lot when I'm planning out the year. I do this a lot at the end of the year. I'll get out Concepts and I'll just start taking notes, because you can use it for things like that, but it also can be used for drawing. It has this extensive palette of both pens and brushes using designer Copic colors. It's just, there's so much that can be done. I mean, I use it for something as simple as note-taking, but you can draw, as I said, you can do storyboarding, graphic design, product iteration, and even architectural planning, because you can scale things to the real world inside of Concepts, which is a really neat feature. The app's been built from the ground up using the iPad's touch interaction at the center of everything, combining both vector graphics along with touch gestures to enhance your productivity and your creative workflow. Everything you can draw can be edited, moved, and reorganized, and it allows you to interact with your ideas on a deeper level. You can drag and drop in images onto the canvas, use things like layers. There's a whole grid system to get everything lined up the way you want. Concepts comes with a built-in presentation mode too, that allows you to use it with apps like Zoom, and it basically becomes a virtual whiteboard tool if you want to use it that way. And when you're finished, there are a whole bunch of different ways to export your documents to different formats and share them with your friends and colleagues. The app is free to download, and you can unlock over 200 libraries of brushes, objects, and services via either a subscription or a one-time payment if you'd prefer that. So sketch, explore, and share your ideas infinitely with Concepts. To learn more, go to MacStories. I'll have a link in the show notes. Our thanks to Concepts for their support of Unwind, MacStories, and the entire summer preview series. All right, Federico, let's move on to our Unwind picks. And I'm going to say right off the bat, I've been very generous, and I've given you your pick because I didn't want to fight with you, Federico. I mean, we've got a lot going on, and I didn't want to fight over this pick. So I'll just give you your pick. But for the record, it's also my pick. I'll call this my co-pick.
How gracious of you, John.
I'm a nice guy.
Yes, you are. So there's only one possible music pick this week. And unsurprisingly, I think literally nobody who has some kind of knowledge of our music tastes will be surprised by this pick. It's the new album Folklore by Taylor Swift. Obviously, this album came out as a surprise album last week. Just it was announced the day before, and then it just came out. And Taylor Swift recorded this album. This is a quarantine album, right? She recorded the album during the lockdown in her, I believe, in her home studio. And it was largely produced with the help of the, I'm so bad with names, with the Nationals, Aaron Dressner, I want to say.
Yeah, I think that's right. I just read an interview with him in Rolling Stone, I think it was.
Okay, perfect. And it also features, obviously, Jack Antonoff doing production. And there is a track that is the collaboration of Taylor Swift and Bon Iver. This album is beautiful, I'm gonna say, and it's very different from say 1989 and Reputation. It's also very different from Lover. This is a lo-fi indie pop album, I would say, and it features the usual Taylor Swift themes, so love and heartbreak and adult relationship. But I think it's got more of an adult spin on it. So just some of the ways that she talks about certain ideas, like having an affair, for example. And for example, there's this theme that permeates the entire album of how women are called crazy many times, unfortunately, by men when they get upset, legitimately so, for something. So, and there's even a song called Mad Woman, which I think is really one of the highlights of the album. And what really stands out to me here is a couple of things. The first is that this came out as a surprise. Literally nobody was expecting this. And so I always love when artists, as they say, they pull a Beyonce and just drop an album on you, right? I think it still works very nicely for me whenever I get surprised with a new album. And the second thing is, during the lockdown here in Italy, and I think elsewhere as well, we've seen artists produce this sort of quarantine music, right? And it's fine. I mean, of course, I think it's a beautiful thing. But most of those creations, you can tell that they were produced in a different state than usual, right? You can tell that they were maybe rushed or maybe produced not with the usual equipment. There's usually something about it, right? And you can tell that it's like, okay, this is new music, but it's like done during this special occasion. This album, it sounds like a real album in the best possible way. It sounds like a Taylor Swift album with a different genre, but it sounds rich and full and like it was the result of years of work. It doesn't sound like something that she was inspired the month before and then it happened. I don't know how to describe it, but it sounds like she worked on this for years. And I guess it speaks to Taylor Swift's master of her craft, right? That she was able to put this together in a relatively short period of time. So it is an excellent album. I love the genre. I love the sound of it. I love the lyrics. As usual, there's Taylor Swift has a way to have all these callbacks and these hidden details in her lyrics that I really appreciate. And of course, Exile, the track with Bon Iver, is stunning. It's such a beautiful song. And everything else on this album is really just beautiful. So go listen to the album. Go read the Pitchfork review. I think it really captures the spirit of the album well. And I'm just so amazed that Taylor Swift was able to do this. It's definitely one of the things that I will remember of 2020 and just this weird period of our history. This album is just outstanding.
Yeah, it is an amazing album, and I always know it's always a sign that something is head and shoulders above everything else I've been listening to. For me, when
Yeah.
I just put it on repeat, and I guess it was last Friday when this hit. It came in at midnight, and throughout the day on Friday, I just put this album on repeat and listened to it over and over. And every time I listened, I enjoyed it more. There was a new layer kind of peeled back. You kind of dive into the lyrics more and understand the melodies more. It's a fantastic album. I think in a way it's a synthesis and a culmination of
Yeah.
a lot of different threads throughout her career, where you can hear things in this album that are very much early Taylor Swift songs that have definitely a country feel to them to an extent, but there's also the more pop and alternative influences in there that are much more current and recent. And it's a blend and kind of a maturity that it's an album that's not trying to be too much of one thing in a lot of ways. I feel like it's not trying to be
Right.
Taylor Swift doing rap or Taylor Swift doing pop or Taylor Swift doing country. It's a Taylor Swift album. It's very much of, I think, her style and personality, and songwriting is obviously a huge strength here, and just an amazing album that I'm going to be listening to for a long time. I think I've been enjoying it, and it's something that I've been going back to throughout the week since it was released. Okay, Federico, my pick this week is The Umbrella Academy. The Umbrella Academy is a series on Netflix. It's got season 2 has just come out, and I never got to season 1, so I decided I had to go back and check it out. And I was skeptical because when I saw this the first time around, it sounded an awful lot like the X-Men from Marvel on the surface, because it's a story of a bunch of orphan teenagers who have superpowers, and they're organized by their adoptive father to fight crime and do things like this. But the story isn't so much about that. The story is about the father who has died and the mystery behind that. And then there's a big event. I'm not going to spoil it, but there's a big event on the near horizon that they're trying to prevent. So the entire first season is all about that. There's like 10 episodes. They're an hour each. I'm only about halfway through, but I've enjoyed it enough that I thought it ought to be a pick this week, because the new season's out. I know, for instance, I know that my wife doesn't really like superhero stuff.
Okay.
But she likes this because it's really more of a crime mystery and a drama than anything else. I mean, yes, there's a butler who's a chimpanzee who talks, and there are these kids with these powers that are kind of interesting, and it's set in kind of an alternate universe. It seems like it's kind of in the past because there aren't cell phones. They're talking on, like corded phones and things like that. But it's very different. And I've enjoyed kind of the mystery aspect of it. And it's got an action element to it too, because there's an event on the horizon coming up, and people are trying to figure out how to prevent this thing from happening, which creates a lot of the tension and drama leading up to the final episode. So about halfway through, really enjoy it. If you got that kind of superhero sci-fi quality to it without being too much on that side, is how I guess I would put it. So I would definitely give it a try, even if that's not your thing. And if you watch the first season, you can just roll right into the second season, which has come out on Netflix, I think, just like a day or two ago.
You know who the creator of the original comic book series is?
No, I actually don't. I have not looked into this much, because this was not my pick. It was my wife's pick who came up with this originally.
The Umbrella Academy was created by Gerard Way. He's the singer of My Chemical Romance.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was familiar with the series, but I've never watched it myself.
Interesting. All right. Well, I would highly recommend it. So check it out when you have some time. All right, Federico, I think that's enough for this week. I'm going to wrap it up right here. I want to thank again Concepts for sponsoring the whole summer series, as well as this episode in MacStories this week. You, of course, can find Federico and me over at MacStories.net. Federico is over on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Fetici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees on both, JOHN VOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.